This is lecture 30, Isolationism and the Road to World War II, between 1920 and 1941. Isolationism, like the picture over here to the right, was where America did not want to get involved in political conflicts with foreign nations. It went back to World War I, and some Americans were rethinking our role there and whether we should be involved in such conflicts in the future. So this is the approach that we took in the 1920s. By the end of the 1920s and the 1930s, we went through the Great Depression. Even more of a reason to remain isolated. We wanted young American men to stay here in America to provide for their families. Now, while we were isolated ourselves from political conflicts, we were participating with other nations at attempts to keep peace following World War I. Attempts to keep peace, attempts to cut down on some of our military to prevent wars. We did participate in that. And these are some examples of America in foreign affairs trying to keep peace and prevent military conflict. The Washington Naval Conference was done in 1922. It was an attempt to reduce naval arms, in the Pacific between America, Japan, and Britain. There was a 5-power treaty signed in the same year to limit the amount of battleships between America and Japan. So these two, specifically in the Pacific, specifically with Japan, because they were in growing industrial force with a strong military as well. These were powers to kind of check the military to prevent conflict in the future. In 1928, America participated in the Kellogg-Briand Pact. 62 nations signed this contract. Kellogg-Briand Pact, 1928. 62 nations signed this pact to make war illegal, to not engage in war unless it was for defensive purposes. Again, something you really can't enforce. It was more symbolic than anything. 62 nations agreed to make war illegal unless it was for defensive purposes. Now, the Dawes Plan, signed in 1924, was interesting because while we were not involved politically in Europe, just an example that we would still remain involved economically. The Dawes Plan of 1924 allowed for American banks to give loans to Germany to pay back the reparations, to pay back for the losses to France and England from World War I. So economically, America is still involved. It allowed American bankers to help Germany pay back their reparations from World War I. As we know, the elements of war in World War II would eventually drag us in. The terrible economic crisis in the world, the Great Depression, was a depression around the world, created a lot of instability in these nations, these new nations after World War I. And when times are desperate, people turn to leaders that are not particularly stable, dangerous leaders. The concept of totalitarian is when a government takes total control of the state. And sometimes that would mean a dictator. And we're going to see in Italy the rise of this man right here, Benito Mussolini, who created a political ideology known as fascism. He was the one responsible for it. And under fascism, it was a strong state. It was deep nationalism and pride in your nation. It was about giving up your rights and liberties and freedoms to your nation for the good of everyone. And the fascists also supported aggression, expanding. Mussolini promised a new Roman Empire in Italy. The success of Mussolini, we're also going to see it by the leader of the Nazi Party in Germany, Adolf Hitler, who was also going to adapt the same fascist political ideology to become a ruthless dictator. Now, in Russia, the result of their Bolshevik revolution, their communist revolution, Vladimir Lenin was dictator, and after he passed away, they're going to have a communist dictator like none other by the name of Joseph Stalin that will rule with an iron fist as well. However, the communists and the fascists opposed each other as they began to influence these fragile states in Europe and around the world. So this is what was happening in Europe, the rise of these men and how they wanted to expand. And across the ocean from us, Japan was being taken over by their military. So much so that Japan invades a province of China, Manchuria, in 1931. This would be the first major act of aggression following World War II. This would be the first test of the League of Nations. The organization was supposed to keep peace around the world. Well, it failed that test. The League of Nations, while they spoke against the action, they took no military action. America is concerned, but again, we largely want to remain neutral. So in 1931, this was under Herbert Hoover, we issued the Hoover-Simpson Doctrine, which was just a declaration that we do not recognize Manchuria as part of Japan, that we only recognize Manchuria as part of China. We don't recognize Japan's rights to Manchuria. Again, just something symbolic. We're not going to back it up with any type of action. Now, I told you America wanted to remain neutral because there was some regret about World War I, the resources you have to use, the American soldiers that would die, etc. Also influential in American politics was the findings of the Nye Committee. The Nye Committee was a congressional investigation after World War I. A congressional investigation after World War I that said the people that made weapons in America, the corporations that made weapons in America, made big profits from World War I. So they were almost hinting it was a conspiracy, that the wealthy munitions manufacturers or the wealthy weapons manufacturers made great profits. Like they influenced our decision to enter World War I. The Nye Committee called these weapons manufacturers merchants of death. So that added to kind of the regret of World War I. So as these men began to take military actions, America, well, our government told our people, we're going to stay out. An example of our isolationism, the Congress is going to pass the Neutrality Acts in 35, 36, and 37. Under these laws, America would not sell weapons to a nation at war. So it's like we're nowhere going to get involved. We're not even going to sell weapons to nations at war. And you can kind of see this criticism over here in this political cartoon. What a lucky thing we've got separate beds. This is Europe and their problems. We are going to stay out. Gradually, events will get us closer and closer to the conflict. The Panay incident in 1937, Japan sank an American gunboat. That was the name of it. Which Japan apologized to, but again, was the beginning of a conflict, was beginning of tension between America and Japan. As Japan was expanding in China, and of course, Hitler was expanding in Europe, Franklin Roosevelt took a bold move. You could call it a step away from neutrality when he delivered his quarantine speech in 1937. He urged democracies to quarantine aggressive nations through trade. So he was urging democracies to quarantine aggressive nations through trade. Don't trade with nations that are invading others. This is what he called upon of democracies. Now, a series of events takes place in Europe. Hitler invades Austria. The League of Nations did nothing, and the democracies were very upset. And then Hitler wanted a piece of Czechoslovakia known as the Sudetenland, and he was threatening military action if Czechoslovakia didn't give it to him. So a very important meeting took place in Germany, a meeting in which democracies would face Hitler to decide if they would give in to his demands, the Munich Conference of 1938. Again, he was demanding a land known as the Sudetenland from Czechoslovakia. The outcome of the meeting, the democracies there did not include America, included Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of England, and the French. The democracies met with him and they allowed Hitler to acquire the land with the condition that Hitler would no longer invade other nations. People thought the Munich Conference brought peace. But instead, we look back on history. The Munich Conference was an example of appeasement. That's an important term. Appeasement is when you give in to an aggressor to prevent conflict. They appeased them. We all know when you appease an aggressor, they keep being aggressive. Hitler broke the Munich Conference and invaded all of Czechoslovakia. So now the democracies of Europe gave Hitler an ultimatum: invade any more land and we will be at war. By that time, Germany had built an enormous military in Germany, and he didn't care. In 1939, Hitler and Germany invades Poland, starting World War II in Europe. A major concern to America: a second world war breaks out. Our response: the Neutrality Act of 1939. That will take us a step closer to war. The American Congress decides we will sell weapons to the Allies on a cash and carry basis. We will sell weapons to the Allies, which are the British and the French, on a cash and carry basis. Hitler not only invaded and defeated Poland, but he made an agreement with Stalin, where Stalin invaded Poland from the east. Roosevelt is going to take another step closer to war when he gives his famous Arsenal of Democracy speech following the Neutrality Act of 1939. In his speech, Roosevelt said, "We must be the great warehouse of the Allies as they fight these aggressive nations. Provide them the weapons for war." And a lot of Americans criticized him for that, saying, "You're taking us into war." In 1940, the unthinkable happened. Hitler invades and defeats France. Here's Adolf Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower. After defeating France, Hitler begins an invasion of Great Britain. To America, this is a great concern. This is the last democratic ally still standing in Europe. It's getting closer and closer to us. Hitler, meanwhile, makes an alliance with Japan, which is also scary to us, that he has an ally in the Pacific close to us. Fortunately for Great Britain, the Battle of Britain began with a bombing campaign. And while it caused a lot of devastation, the British were able to fight back, at least to prevent an all-out invasion. So there was a little stall to the Nazi attempt to conquer Europe. In America, the debate begins whether to enter this conflict, especially with Great Britain barely hanging on. In America, we see a political organization against the war, the America First Committee. The America First Committee opposed the war, included such famous Americans as Charles Lindbergh. And this was one of their sayings: "England will fight to the last American." You see the cartoon over here, America First. There's a different way. We don't have to go to war. There's a different way. By 1941, America making weapons and helping the Allies, this would only increase. And by the way, it's helping our economy. The factories are going, the lights are going back on, and we're making weapons of war. By 1941, America takes an even bolder move when Congress passes the Lend-Lease Act. Beyond selling weapons of war to the Allies, we will also lend them weapons. We are not only just going to sell weapons of war, we are also lending weapons of war to England. And actually, England made an alliance with Russia. So to both nations, we are now, because Hitler invaded Russia as well, we are selling and now lending weapons of war to the Allies. Some argue that the Lend-Lease Act was really officially America entered the war economically. Officially, America entered the war economically. And look at this cartoon over here, it kind of explains it. Okay, we're giving them the weapons. And you know how the Germans are going to see it, as an act of war. Early in the war, Roosevelt even had a secret meeting with the Prime Minister of England, Winston Churchill. Roosevelt meets with the leader of England for a first talk about how to fix Europe after World War II. It was a meeting to discuss how to fix Europe after World War II. It was a meeting, of course, in which they're going to support democracies and they're going to support nations to choose their own government. It was an initial symbolic talk between the leader of England and President Roosevelt about how to fix Europe after World War II. Closer to home, the same way Hitler was being aggressive, Japan was being aggressive. They were invading not only a lot of mainland China, but they also invaded Vietnam, or French Indochina. The Japanese are getting close to our allies and our resources in the Philippines. And we send a warning to Japan to stop invading nations in the Pacific. We sent a warning to them with an economic embargo in 1941. We put leverage on them, a warning with them. We told them, stop invading nations. Well, actually, with the embargo of 1941, we refused to sell Japan goods unless they retreated from their aggressive acts. Because of the invasion of French Indochina or Vietnam, we refused to sell them American goods unless they stopped their aggression. Now, part of the embargo of 1941, the most important good that we sold to Japan was oil. And that's what this picture demonstrates over here. We refused. See, Uncle Sam is kinky the hose there. The embargo of 1941 upset Japan, and they appeared to send diplomats with us and try to work out this conflict. Secretly, though, Japan was planning an attack on America because of the embargo of 1941. That attack came on December 7th, 1941 in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor. A bulk of the American Pacific Fleet was supposed to be stationed at Pearl Harbor. Thank goodness our aircraft carriers had left days before the attack. But our battleships took a beating. Japan, and it's a total surprise attack, we didn't see them coming, attacked us on December 7th, 1941. Roosevelt asked Congress for a declaration of war on the very next day. We were in World War II because the alliances, the military alliances, backed each other up. So America enters World War II in 1941. Some things to think about. Remember, in AP curriculum, battles and military operations are not significant. It's more or less causes and how it changed America. The big cause here is, how do we get involved in this conflict? Trace the shift of American foreign policy from isolationism in the 20s and 30s to increase internationalism. That means getting involved. Prior to the attack on Pearl Harbor, what factors accounted for this shift? Describe how we went from being neutral to going to war. What political actions did we take and why?